A desperate young mother arrives at a small Montana homestead with 6 children and a handful of letters promising a new beginning, only to find that her intended husband is furious about children he never knew existed. But in this close-knit frontier community, where most see only burden, one lonely widower recognizes the courage it takes to travel across the country seeking a better life. This is a story about finding family in unexpected places and how sometimes life's biggest disappointments lead to its greatest blessings. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The harsh January wind howled across the plains as the stagecoach rumbled into Silver Creek, Montana territory. Snow swirled around its wooden wheels, creating ghostly patterns against the twilight sky. Inside the coach, Clara Bennett clutched her youngest child closer, trying to shield the 4-year-old from the bitter cold that seeped through every crack and seam of the vehicle. "Almost there, my loves," Clara whispered, her breath visible in the frigid air. She glanced around at her children, 6 of them, ranging from 4 to 12 years old, crammed together on the bench seats. The older ones sat straight-backed and solemn, while the younger ones dozed against their siblings' shoulders, exhausted from the 3-day journey. At 32, Clara had already weathered more hardships than most people twice her age. Her husband Thomas had died from pneumonia 18 months ago, leaving her alone with 6 children and a mountain of debts in their small Ohio town. With no family to turn to and creditors threatening to take their home, Clara had made the most desperate decision of her life. The newspaper advertisement remained fresh in her mind, though the actual clipping was worn thin from constant handling. "Established rancher seeks respectable widow for marriage. Position offers stability and good standing in growing territory." After exchanging letters for 3 months, Jackson Miller's correspondence had convinced her that Silver Creek could offer her children the future. Ohio couldn't open spaces instead of cramped tenements, fresh air instead of coal smoke, and, most importantly, a father figure who had written of having ample land and resources to provide for a ready-made family. Clara had sold everything except her wedding band, her grandmother's silver hairbrush, and what clothing and necessities she could pack in 2 trunks to fund the journey west. The rest of the small inheritance Thomas had left had purchased passage for her and the children on the Union Pacific Railroad as far as Helena, then the stagecoach to Silver Creek. "Mama, are we there yet?" whispered 10-year-old Alice, her blue eyes wide with anxiety. Clara stroked her daughter's auburn hair, so like her own. "Yes, sweetheart, this is our new home." She forced confidence into her voice, though her own heart raced with apprehension. What if Jackson Miller was nothing like his letters? What if Silver Creek wasn't the haven he'd described? "Silver Creek Station, final stop," the driver called, his voice nearly lost in the howling wind. Clara straightened her threadbare wool coat and gathered her youngest, Emma, more securely in her arms. "Matthew," she said to her oldest, "help your brothers and sisters down while I speak with the driver." 12-year-old Matthew nodded solemnly, his young face already showing the responsibility that had been thrust upon him since his father's death. "Yes, Mama." When the stagecoach door swung open, a gust of snow-laden wind nearly took Clara's breath away. The driver, a weathered man with a frost-covered beard, peered inside. "Need a hand, ma'am? Looks like you've got quite the brood there." "Thank you, yes," Clara replied, carefully passing Emma to him before stepping down into the snow, which immediately soaked through her thin-soled boots. The biting cold shot up her legs, but she maintained her composure as she reclaimed her youngest daughter. The stagecoach stop consisted of little more than a wooden platform adjacent to Silver Creek's main street, a single dirt thoroughfare, now blanketed in snow and lined with wooden buildings. Clara scanned the small gathering that had braved the cold to meet the stage, searching for the man who had described himself as 45 years of age, of sturdy build with dark hair graying at the temples, and a demeanor befitting a successful rancher. As Matthew helped his siblings down 10-year-old Alice, 8-year-old twins Henry and Hannah, 6-year-old Joseph, and finally 4-year-old Emma, Clara continued searching the faces in the crowd. Her heart leapt when a tall man approached, well dressed in a wool coat that spoke of prosperity. His hair was indeed dark with touches of silver at the temples, and his clean-shaven face might have been handsome if not for the deepening frown as his gaze moved from her face to the children gathering around her. "Mr. Miller?" she asked, shifting Emma higher on her hip as the child began to whimper from the cold. "Jackson Miller, yes," he confirmed, his voice clipped, nothing like the warm, inviting tone she'd imagined while reading his letters. He made no move to assist her or greet her properly. Instead, he stood stiffly, his eyes now fixed on the children with unmistakable dismay. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you," Clara said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the sinking feeling in her stomach. "I apologize for the children's restlessness. The journey has been long and they're all cold and hungry." "You didn't mention children in your letters," Miller said flatly. "Not once," Clara blinked in confusion. "I most certainly did. In my 3rd letter, I explained that I was recently widowed with 6 children. I was explicit about needing a fresh start for my family." "I received no such information," his tone suggested he believed she had deliberately deceived him. "I agreed to marry a widow, Mrs. Bennett, not to take responsibility for 6 children that aren't mine. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." The stagecoach driver, who had been unloading her trunks, paused at the harsh words. Nearby conversations quieted as townsfolk turned to observe the uncomfortable exchange. "There must be some mistake," Clara insisted, though doubt began to creep in. Had the letter explaining her children somehow gone astray? "I would never have undertaken such a journey without being forthright about my circumstances." Miller shook his head, taking a step backward as though to distance himself physically from the situation. "Mistake or deliberate omission, the result is the same. I have no interest in raising 6 children. I sought a wife to manage my household and present a respectable image for my ranch, not to inherit a ready-made family." Clara felt as though the ground was shifting beneath her feet. The children, sensing her distress, pressed closer to her. Matthew's face hardened with a protective anger beyond his years, while Alice clutched Hannah's hand tightly. "What am I to do then?" Clara asked, struggling to maintain her composure as curious onlookers gathered. "I've spent everything I had to come here." "That's hardly my concern," Miller replied, though a flicker of discomfort crossed his face. At the attention they were drawing, he lowered his voice. "There's a small hotel down the street. I'll pay for 2 nights' lodging. After that, you'll need to make other arrangements." Before Clara could respond, a woman pushed through the small crowd that had gathered. Middle-aged with gray-streaked brown hair and a sturdy build beneath her heavy coat, she approached with concern etched on her kind face. "Everything all right here, Jackson?" she asked, though her gaze was fixed on Clara and the shivering children. "A misunderstanding, Mrs. Caldwell," Miller replied stiffly. "Mrs. Bennett failed to mention certain complications in our correspondence." Mrs. Caldwell's eyes narrowed slightly at Miller's tone, but her expression remained polite. "I see." She turned to Clara, her face softening. "Those little ones are near frozen, poor things. The hotel's not fit for children, drafty old place. I'm Margaret Caldwell. I run the general store just up the street with my husband. We have a room above the shop that would suit you and the children better." Clara's eyes stung with tears she refused to shed. "Thank you, but I'm afraid I have limited funds for lodging." "We can discuss that later," Margaret said firmly. "Right now those children need warmth, and I'd wager you could use a hot meal yourself." Miller cleared his throat. "As I was saying, I'll cover 2 nights' lodging." "That's very generous of you, Jackson," Margaret interrupted, her tone suggesting it was anything but. "I'm sure your conscience is much relieved." She turned back to Clara. "Come along, dear. My son can bring your trunks." Clara found herself following Margaret Caldwell away from the stagecoach stop, away from Jackson Miller and his broken promises, and toward an uncertain future in a town where she knew no one. The children followed in a silent procession, their small faces pinched with cold and confusion. The Caldwell General Store was a large two-story structure with a wide porch and windows glowing warmly against the gathering dusk. Inside, the shop was closed for the day, but Margaret led them through to a back staircase that opened to a comfortable apartment above. "Robert," Margaret called, "come help with this lady's trunks." A young man of perhaps 18 appeared from a back room, wiping his hands on a cloth. He took in the scene, Clara with the children, his mother's determined expression, and nodded. "Yes, ma'am. They still at the stage?" "Right where that fool Miller left them," Margaret confirmed, helping Clara remove her coat while somehow managing to take Emma from her arms at the same time. After Robert departed, Margaret guided Clara to a rocking chair near the fireplace where flames already danced cheerfully. "Now then, let me hold this little angel while you warm up." Too exhausted to protest, Clara surrendered Emma to the older woman's capable hands. Margaret cooed to the child while expertly checking her for any signs of cold exposure. "They all seem healthy despite the journey," she pronounced, looking over the other children who had clustered near the fire, their young faces a mixture of wariness and relief at the sudden warmth. "And their names?" "Matthew is my oldest," Clara replied, relaxing incrementally in the chair's gentle motion and the room's blessed warmth. "Then Alice, the twins Henry and Hannah, Joseph and Emma, my youngest." Margaret nodded approvingly. "Fine-looking children. And their father?" "Thomas," Clara's voice caught. "He died of pneumonia 18 months ago. He worked at the steel mill. The hours were long, the conditions poor, his lungs." She didn't finish the sentence. Understanding filled Margaret's eyes. "And so you answered Jackson Miller's advertisement?" "Yes." Clara didn't elaborate further. The humiliation of her reception was still too raw. Margaret's expression hardened briefly. "Miller's a successful rancher, but he's always been more concerned with appearances than substance. I should have guessed his sudden interest in finding an Eastern wife had more to do with impressing his business associates than genuine companionship." The front door opened, bringing a blast of cold air as Robert returned with Clara's trunks. Another figure followed him inside, a tall, broad-shouldered man in a heavy coat dusted with snow, carrying what looked like a doctor's bag. "Back so soon, Samuel?" Margaret asked. "I thought you were heading out to the Harrison place." "Their boy was laid up with that fever." "His fever broke," the man replied, removing his hat to reveal thick chestnut hair, threaded with silver and a face lined by time and weather, yet handsome in its strong features. His eyes, a deep amber that reminded Clara of autumn leaves, moved from Margaret to Clara and the children with undisguised curiosity. "Dr. Samuel Wilson," Margaret said by way of introduction. "Samuel, this is Mrs. Clara Bennett and her children. They've had quite the welcome to Silver Creek, I'm afraid." Dr. Wilson hung his coat on a peg by the door, approaching with a practiced eye that seemed to take in Clara's pale exhaustion and the children's condition in one sweeping glance. "Mrs. Bennett was Jackson Miller's intended," Margaret continued, her tone conveying volumes. "Was?" Dr. Wilson raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Miller was unprepared for children," Clara said quietly, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. Understanding dawned in the doctor's eyes, followed by something that might have been anger, quickly masked. "I see." He moved closer, bending slightly to observe Emma in Margaret's arms. "May I? Traveling can be hard on little ones." Clara nodded, allowing the doctor to examine her youngest with gentle, competent hands. His touch was professional, yet somehow comforting as he checked the child's lungs, temperature, and reflexes. "Healthy little girl," he pronounced, then repeated the examination with each of the other children, speaking to them with easy familiarity that soon had even shy Hannah smiling. "All seem no worse for the journey, though I'd recommend plenty of warmth, rest, and regular meals to help them recover." "Thank you, Doctor," Clara said, relaxing slightly at his assessment. "Samuel delivered half the children in this territory," Margaret said with obvious pride. "Including my Robert, though that was some time ago." Dr. Wilson smiled briefly at this, the expression transforming his serious face into something unexpectedly warm. "Margaret exaggerates, though I will say your children are remarkably resilient considering their journey. You must have taken excellent care of them under difficult circumstances, Mrs. Bennett." The simple acknowledgement of her efforts, something no one had offered since she'd been widowed, brought a fresh wave of emotion that Clara struggled to contain. She blinked rapidly, focusing on Emma's tiny fingers wrapped around her own. "Now." "Then," Margaret said briskly, perhaps sensing Clara's fragile composure. "Robert, take Mrs. Bennett's trunks up to the blue room. Samuel, you'll stay for supper." "I hadn't planned to," the doctor began, then glanced at Clara again. Something in her expression, or perhaps the children's presence, seemed to change his mind, but I suppose my other patients can wait a bit longer. As Robert carried her trunks upstairs and Margaret disappeared to the kitchen with Emma still contentedly cradled in her arms, Clara found herself alone with Dr. Wilson. The silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable, but heavy with unasked questions. "I apologize for intruding on your family's hospitality," Clara finally said. "Once I've rested, I'll make arrangements to move on." Dr. Wilson studied her with those perceptive amber eyes. "Move on to where, Mrs. Bennett?" The simple question laid bare the precariousness of her situation. Clara had no answer that didn't reveal the complete desperation of her circumstances. Before she could formulate a response that preserved some dignity, Joseph began to fuss, his small face scrunching with hunger. "May I?" Dr. Wilson offered, extending his hands toward the boy. Surprised, Clara nodded and watched as the doctor lifted Joseph with a confidence that spoke of experience. Most men she'd known, including Thomas, had been hesitant with children, especially fussy ones. But Dr. Wilson held Joseph with practiced ease, speaking to him in low, soothing tones, while Clara organized the other children. "You seem comfortable with children," she observed as they followed Margaret's voice calling them to supper. A shadow passed over the doctor's face. "I had 4 of my own." He offered no further explanation, but the past tense told Clara all she needed to know. "I'm so sorry," she said simply, understanding the magnitude of such loss. He nodded once in acknowledgement, then watched as Clara gathered her children around the large kitchen table where Margaret had laid out a hearty meal of beef stew, fresh bread, and preserves. "Silver Creek needs families, Mrs. Bennett," Dr. Wilson said carefully as they seated themselves. "The Montana Territory is hard on those who face it alone." "As I'm discovering," Clara replied with a wry smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Perhaps Jackson Miller's short-sightedness might prove fortunate for someone else in our community," Dr. Wilson said, his gaze thoughtful as he passed a basket of bread to Matthew. Before Clara could interpret this cryptic statement, Margaret returned, with Emma, who was now happily gumming a wooden spoon. "Supper's ready," she announced. "I've had Robert prepare warm water for baths for the little ones afterward. Nothing improves a trying day like clean children and a full stomach." As Clara watched her children begin to eat, the tension in their small bodies gradually easing with warmth and food, a fragile tendril of hope unfurled in her chest. Perhaps, just perhaps, this wasn't the end of her journey, but rather an unexpected detour on the path to the home she sought. Morning light filtered through lace curtains, casting delicate patterns across the blue wallpaper of the room above. The general store. Clara woke disoriented, momentarily forgetting where she was, until her children's soft breathing around her brought reality rushing back. The events of yesterday, the humiliating rejection, Margaret Caldwell's kindness, Dr. Wilson's thoughtful gaze, all settled over her like the patchwork quilt covering her bed. The children still slept, exhausted from their journey. Matthew and Joseph shared a small trundle bed in the corner, while the twins were curled together at the foot of the large bed, where Clara lay with Alice and Emma. She slipped quietly from between her daughters, careful not to wake them. She washed her face in the porcelain basin and changed into her second-best dress, a faded blue cotton that had once been quite fine. Her reflection in the small mirror revealed dark circles beneath her eyes despite her night's rest. She pinned her auburn hair into a simple bun, desperate to present a composed image that belied her inner turmoil. A soft knock at the door interrupted her preparations. Margaret entered carrying a tray with steaming coffee, fresh bread, and preserves. "Thought you might prefer breakfast up here this morning," she said, setting the tray on a small table. "Those little ones still sleeping?" Clara nodded gratefully. "They rarely sleep this long. The journey must have exhausted them." "Travel's hard on the smallest ones," Margaret agreed, pouring coffee into a delicate cup. "Robert's bringing up water for washing when they wake. How did you manage the journey alone with 6 children?" "One step at a time," Clara replied with a small smile. "Matthew is a tremendous help. He's had to grow up too quickly since his father died." Margaret nodded, her expression sympathetic. "Children adapt, sometimes better than we do." She hesitated, then voiced the question that had clearly been on her mind. "What will you do now, Clara? Silver Creek is a long way from anywhere." Clara sipped her coffee, gathering courage for her next question. "I must ask about your rates for lodging. Mr. Miller mentioned paying for 2 nights. But Miller sent money around this morning by his ranch hand," Margaret interrupted. "Paid for a week actually, though he included a note saying he'd told you differently." She sniffed disapprovingly. "Trying to pressure you into leaving sooner, I expect. Shame doesn't sit well on some men's shoulders. A week?" Clara's mind raced 7 days to determine her next steps, to find employment or another solution in the town where her introduction had been public humiliation, where she knew no one except the kind woman before her and the enigmatic doctor, who had treated her children with unexpected gentleness. "A week gives you time to consider options," Margaret continued, seemingly reading Clara's thoughts. "Silver Creek's growing. There might be opportunities for a capable woman." "I was a schoolteacher before I married," Clara admitted, "though I doubt any school would hire a woman with 6 children." "Perhaps not the school," Margaret acknowledged. "But there are families who might value education for their children. Ranchers and farmers whose homesteads lie too far from town for daily attendance." This possibility hadn't occurred to Clara. A flicker of hope kindled in her chest, quickly, tempered by practicality. "Even so, I would need accommodation that allows for the children, and I doubt private tutoring would provide enough for rent and necessities." Margaret hesitated, then spoke carefully. "There is another possibility, though I hesitate to mention it so soon after recent disappointments." Clara steeled herself. "Please speak plainly. There are men in this territory, respectable established men, who would value a wife with your qualities. Men who, unlike Jackson Miller, understand that children are a blessing, not a burden." Margaret smoothed her apron unnecessarily. "You needn't rush into anything, of course. A week allows time for proper introductions and considerations." The prospect of another arranged marriage made Clara's stomach clench, but she forced herself to consider it objectively. Her primary responsibility was to her children. If another match offered them security and a proper home, could she refuse? Based on her own wounded pride? "I appreciate your suggestion," Clara said carefully, "though I confess the thought of presenting myself for approval again is daunting." Margaret reached across the table to pat Clara's hand. "No presentations necessary. Simply join community." Gatherings as my guest. Attend Sunday services. Meet people naturally. Silver Creek has good folk, despite your first impression. Before Clara could respond, Emma began to fuss, her cries quickly escalating, as was her habit. The other children stirred, Joseph rubbing his eyes sleepily while Matthew immediately sat up, alert to his mother's potential needs. "I'll bring up that washing water," Margaret said, rising. "And perhaps you'd join us downstairs once these little ones are settled. The store gets morning customers, and folks are curious about new arrivals. Might be good to introduce yourself on your own terms, rather than let gossip define you." After Margaret departed, Clara tended to her awakening brood, her mind turning over possibilities. Tutoring might provide some income, but likely not enough. Another marriage could offer stability, but after Miller's rejection, the thought made her chest tighten with anxiety. And beneath these practical concerns lay a deeper fear that she had made a terrible mistake coming to Montana territory, risking her children's well-being on promises penned by a stranger. Dressed and composed, Clara led her children downstairs. An hour later, the general store was already busy with morning customers who paused in their shopping to observe the new arrivals. Clara held her head high, determined to face the curious stares with dignity. "Mrs. Bennett," Margaret called from behind the counter, "come meet some of our neighbors." Clara approached, keeping her children close. "Good morning," she said, her voice steady. "I'm Clara Bennett. These are my children, Matthew, Alice, Henry, Hannah, Joseph, and Emma." An elderly woman examining bolts of fabric smiled kindly. "Sarah Peterson. My husband and I have the dairy farm just outside town." She nodded toward the children. "Fine-looking family. You've traveled far?" "From Ohio," Clara confirmed. "My husband passed last year. We're seeking a fresh start." Clara was surprised by the sympathetic nods and kind words that followed. Many of the women introduced themselves and their children, offering practical information about Silver Creek, which shops had the fairest prices, when the school term began, which church families attended. "Most everyone in Silver Creek came from somewhere else," explained Mrs. Peterson. "The territory's still young. We understand starting over." As Clara was helping Alice try on a knitted cap that Margaret insisted on giving her, the shop door opened, admitting a blast of cold air and Dr. Wilson himself. He removed his hat, revealing hair slightly disheveled from the wind, and nodded. "Greetings to the assembled company." "Samuel," Margaret said warmly, "coffee's fresh in the back if you're making rounds." "Actually, I've come on business," he replied, his gaze finding Clara. "Mrs. Bennett, I wonder if I might speak with you." "Privately." A flutter of apprehension rose in Clara's chest. Had he discovered some concern about the children after yesterday's examination? Her worry must have shown on her face, for he quickly added, "Nothing regarding your children's health. They seem remarkably resilient." Slightly relieved but still curious, Clara turned to Matthew. "Watch your brothers and sisters for a moment." The boy nodded, his solemn eyes moving between his mother and the doctor with the wariness of a child who had seen his family security collapse once before. Margaret led them to a small office behind the shop, then discreetly withdrew, closing the door behind her. Clara faced Dr. Wilson with as much composure as she could muster. "How may I help you, doctor?" "It's how I might help you that brings me here," he replied directly. "I understand from Margaret that Miller has provided lodging for a week, but your situation beyond that remains uncertain." Clara stiffened, pride warring with practicality. "I assure you I'm exploring options." "Of course," he nodded. "But perhaps I might offer one you haven't considered." He hesitated, then continued more carefully. "I find myself in need of assistance with my practice. Someone to maintain records, prepare basic remedies, and assist with patients when appropriate. Your educational background as a teacher suggests you have the necessary skills." Clara blinked in surprise. "You're offering me employment?" "I am," he confirmed. The position includes accommodation. My home adjoins my office and has ample room. My late wife designed it for a large family. Something like pain flickered across his face, there and gone so quickly Clara might have imagined it. That's unexpectedly generous, Clara said cautiously. But I must ask, would the arrangement accommodate my children? They require considerable attention. I had assumed the position would include the children, Dr. Wilson replied. In fact, their presence would be an advantage. Many of my patients are mothers with young children who might feel more comfortable seeing your family thriving under the same roof where they seek treatment. The offer seemed almost too perfect, raising Clara's suspicions. Forgive my directness, doctor, but why would you extend such an opportunity to a complete stranger? His amber eyes held hers steadily. Qualified help is scarce in Silver Creek. You're educated, obviously capable, and in need of a situation that accommodates your children. Our needs align. It was a practical answer, yet Clara sensed something unspoken beneath it. Still, she couldn't deny the position solved her most pressing concerns: shelter, income, and the ability to care for her children while working. I would need to consider your offer carefully, she said finally. Perhaps visit your home and office to better understand the duties involved. Of course, he agreed immediately. Would this afternoon be convenient? I have appointments until noon, but afterward, I could show you the facilities. They arranged a time, and Dr. Wilson departed shortly after, leaving Clara to face the curious gazes of Margaret and the remaining customers. She explained the doctor's proposal as simply as possible, downplaying its fortuitous timing. Well, Mrs. Peterson exclaimed when Clara finished, that's Samuel for you, always seeing possibilities where others see problems. It would be a respectable position, another woman added approvingly, and far better than accepting another marriage proposal out of desperation. Martha! Margaret scolded with a glance toward Clara. Oh, I mean no offense, dear, the woman said quickly. But we all know why you came to Silver Creek, and after Miller's shameful behavior. She shook her head. Better to establish yourself independently first. Marriage can wait until the right offer comes along. Despite her embarrassment at having her circumstances so openly discussed, Clara found wisdom in the older woman's words. Wilson's offer provided breathing room time to establish herself in Silver Creek before making more permanent decisions about her future. That afternoon, Margaret offered to watch the children while Clara visited Dr. Wilson's practice. They'll be fine with me, she assured Clara. And you'll think more clearly without them for an hour or two. Clara hadn't been separated from her children since Thomas's death, and the prospect both worried and relieved her. Worry won briefly until Margaret demonstrated her obvious competence with children, settling the youngest ones with toys while giving the older children small tasks to help in the store. You're not alone anymore, Margaret said quietly as Clara prepared to leave. Remember that. These simple words nearly undid Clara's composure. She had been carrying her family's burdens alone for so long that the concept of support felt almost foreign. She squeezed Margaret's hand in silent thanks before setting out. Dr. Wilson's practice was located on Silver Creek's main street, halfway between the church and the blacksmith's shop. The building was larger than Clara expected, a well-maintained two-story structure with Dr. Samuel Wilson, physician and surgeon, painted on a wooden sign above the door. A separate entrance at the side presumably led to the adjoining residence. The waiting room was empty when Clara entered, but a young woman looked up from a desk near a doorway that likely led to examination rooms. Mrs. Bennett? The woman asked, rising. I'm Eliza Dawson, Dr. Wilson's nurse. He's just finishing with his last patient and asked me to make you comfortable. She gestured to a chair. May I offer coffee while you wait? No, thank you, Clara replied, taking the offered seat and studying the waiting room. It was clean and orderly, with simple but comfortable furnishings. Medical texts lined bookshelves along one wall, while framed anatomical illustrations hung. On another, everything spoke of competence and care. Eliza returned to her desk, organizing patient files with practiced efficiency. "Dr. Wilson mentioned you might be joining our practice," she said conversationally. "We've needed help since Mrs. Johnson left to care for her ailing mother in Billings." "He's offered a position," Clara clarified, "though I haven't accepted. Yet, I know little about medical practice." Eliza smiled reassuringly. "Most of the work involves organization and common sense, which Dr. Wilson says teachers have in abundance. Medical knowledge comes with time." She leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice. "Between us, it would be a relief to have another woman here. I'm only part-time since my husband farms, and some female patients prefer women present during examinations." Before Clara could respond, a door opened and Dr. Wilson appeared with an elderly man who was thanking him profusely for something. After seeing his patient out, the doctor turned to Clara. "Mrs. Bennett," he greeted her, his deep voice warming the formal address. "Thank you for coming. I hope Eliza has made you welcome." "Very much so," Clara assured him, rising. "Good. I thought we might start with a tour of the office, then the residence if that suits you." The tour was thorough and informative. The medical office consisted of 2 examination rooms, a small surgery, a dispensary for medicines, and a private consultation room. Dr. Wilson explained the filing system, inventory procedures for medical supplies, and the basic duties that would fall to Clara if she accepted the position. "I don't expect medical knowledge initially," he assured her. "That can be learned. What I need most is organization, attention to detail, and discretion. Patient confidentiality is sacred." "I understand," Clara said, impressed by the systematic way he ran his practice. After showing her the office, he led her through a door at the back into a covered walkway connecting to the residence. The house was surprisingly large and well-appointed, clearly designed for a family much larger than a single man. A spacious kitchen with modern conveniences, a formal dining room, a comfortable parlor with well-stocked bookshelves, and upstairs 6 bedrooms including a nursery still furnished with cribs and small beds. Dr. Wilson paused in the doorway of this room, his expression unreadable. "This would be suitable for your youngest ones," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "It has southern exposure, warm in winter, catches the breeze in summer." Clara walked to the window, noting the view of a small garden, now dormant under snow. The nursery was cheerful despite its disuse, with faded animals painted along one wall and colorful quilts folded neatly at the foot of each small bed. This had been a room created with love, she realized, not merely furnished but designed to delight its occupants. "It's perfect," she said softly, then turned to face him directly. "Dr. Wilson, may I ask a personal question?" He seemed to brace himself but nodded. "Your nurse mentioned a Mrs. Johnson who left to care for her mother and this nursery." She hesitated, unsure how to continue without causing pain. "You're wondering about my family," he finished for her. "It's a natural question, given I'm offering you residence in a home clearly built for children." He drew a deep breath. "My wife Catherine and our children, James, Elizabeth, William, and Sarah died in a diphtheria epidemic 6 years ago. I was attending patients in outlying homesteads during a particularly harsh winter. By the time I returned..." He left the sentence unfinished, the conclusion evident. "I'm so sorry," Clara said, understanding now the shadows she'd glimpsed in his eyes. "It was a difficult time," he acknowledged, his composure admirable despite the obvious pain. "For years, I maintained this house exactly as they left it. Recently, I've come to realize Catherine would have hated seeing rooms meant for living left unused out of grief." Clara nodded, moved by his honesty. "It's a beautiful home. Your wife had excellent taste." "She did," he agreed with the ghost of a smile, "and a practical nature that would approve of its use by someone who needs it." He gestured toward the stairs. There's more to see if you wish, or we can discuss terms if you've seen enough. I believe I've seen what I need to, Clara replied. The position seems well suited to my situation, and the accommodation is more than generous. She paused, wanting to be completely transparent. I should mention that while I'm a quick learner, my experience with medical matters is limited to basic first aid and caring for my children through minor illnesses. As I said, medical knowledge can be acquired, Dr. Wilson assured her. Eliza will assist with patient care until you're comfortable taking on those duties. Initially, I need someone to manage the office, prepare simple tinctures and remedies from established formulas, and maintain order in both house and practice. They proceeded to discuss specifics: hours, compensation, duties, and when Clara might begin. The terms were more than fair, offering security she hadn't dared hope for just 24 hours earlier. Yet beneath her gratitude lay an unsettling question. Was she accepting this position because it truly suited her, or because desperate circumstances left her no choice? As if sensing her internal conflict, Dr. Wilson said quietly, "Take until tomorrow to consider, Mrs. Bennett. This decision affects not only you but your children. I wouldn't rush you into something of such consequence." His consideration touched her. How different from Jackson Miller's cold dismissal was this man's thoughtful respect for her autonomy, even knowing her precarious situation. "Thank you, doctor. I shall give you my answer tomorrow." Clara extended her hand, which he took briefly in a formal handshake. "Regardless of my decision, your kindness has been unexpected." His eyes held hers for a moment. "Sometimes the journey we plan takes an unexpected turn, Mrs. Bennett. In my experience, those detours often lead exactly where we need to go, though we couldn't have known it when we set out." As Clara walked back to the general store through the crisp afternoon air, his words echoed in her mind. Her carefully planned future with Jackson Miller had crumbled upon arrival, yet within 24 hours, another path had opened, one that offered independence rather than subservience, partnership rather than patronage. By the time she reached Margaret's porch, her decision was made. Clara's first week at Dr. Wilson's practice passed in a blur of new routines and adjustments. She had accepted the position the morning after their tour, much to Margaret's approval. By week's end, she and the children were comfortably settled in the doctor's residence, occupying rooms unused since tragedy had emptied them 6 years prior. The January weather remained stubbornly cold, but inside the doctor's home, warmth prevailed. Clara established the children in the cheerful rooms with painted animals on the walls, arranging their meager belongings alongside the toys and furnishings that had belonged to the Wilson children. She had offered to store these mementos, but Dr. Wilson had shaken his head. "They were meant to be used," he'd said simply. "Let them serve their purpose again." On this particular morning, Clara rose before dawn, as had become her habit. The children still slept, their schedule gradually adjusting to the rhythms of the household. She dressed quickly in the practical gray skirt and white shirtwaist that had become her work uniform, then padded downstairs to prepare breakfast before the day's appointments began. She found Dr. Wilson already in the kitchen, coffee brewing on the stove. He wore a crisp white shirt, his suit jacket and tie still hanging on the hook by the back door. "You're up early," she observed, reaching for the flour canister. She had discovered the doctor preferred biscuits to toast, a preference she was happy to accommodate given his generosity. "Couldn't sleep," he replied, pouring coffee into 2 cups and setting one on the table for her. "The Harrison boy's fever returned. His father sent word late last night." Clara nodded, cutting butter into the flour with practiced movements. "Will you be gone all day?" "Depends on his condition. First fevers often take their time breaking." He hesitated. "I've asked Eliza to come in, but she can only stay until noon. Her husband needs her help with a sick mare." "I'll manage the office," Clara assured him, shaping the dough into rounds and placing them on a baking sheet. She had quickly mastered the filing system and basic office procedures, though she remained hesitant about medical matters. Should I reschedule afternoon appointments? Dr. Wilson considered this. Only Mrs. Jensen. She's coming for her monthly tonic for nerves, nothing urgent. The others are mostly dressing changes and follow-ups I'd rather not postpone. Clara slid the biscuits into the oven, then joined him at the table, warming her hands around the coffee cup. I'll need instructions for the dressing changes. Simple ones only, he replied. I've noted the procedures in each patient file. His confidence in her abilities warmed her more than the coffee. You've learned quickly these past weeks. I've had an excellent teacher, she replied, then blushed slightly at his appreciative smile. Their morning routine had developed an easy familiarity that still surprised Clara. Dr. Wilson breakfasted with her, then checked on the children when they woke while she prepared their meals. He never seemed to mind the disruption they brought to his orderly bachelor existence. On the contrary, he often found excuses to interact with them, examining their developing skills with a doctor's eye, but also with genuine interest. This morning followed the pattern until a knock at the back door signaled the arrival of Robert Caldwell, who had come to drive the doctor to the Harrison farm. I'll likely return by supper, Dr. Wilson told Clara as he gathered his medical bag and heavy coat. Send word with Robert if any emergencies arise. After his departure, Clara settled into the day's tasks. The children cooperated by playing quietly in the corner of the office she had arranged for them, allowing her to organize patient files and prepare the examination rooms before Eliza arrived to assist with morning appointments. You're a natural at this, Eliza commented as they worked. The older woman had initially seemed wary of Clara, perhaps concerned about being replaced, but had warmed considerably upon realizing Clara had no desire to usurp her position. Teaching requires organization, Clara replied, labeling newly prepared tinctures of willow bark for fever and chamomile for digestive complaints, and raising 6 children demands efficiency. Eliza laughed, checking the supply of clean bandages. True enough. Speaking of the little ones, they're thriving here. Some whispered you might not manage both work and motherhood, but you've proven them wrong. Clara stiffened slightly. Some. Meaning Jackson Miller, I presume. Eliza had the grace to look embarrassed. Gossip travels in small towns. Jackson Miller was quite vocal about his disappointment, Clara said dryly. She had encountered Miller only once since her arrival at Sunday services, where he had pointedly avoided introducing her to his social circle. The rejection had stung, though Clara pretended indifference. Pay him no mind, Eliza advised. The Millers fancy themselves Silver Creek royalty since Jackson's father established the ranch 30 years ago. But Dr. Wilson has more respect in this town than all the key Millers combined. The morning passed with a steady stream of patients. A rancher with a deep cut from mending fences, a child with an ear infection, an expectant mother seeking reassurance about her advancing pregnancy. Eliza handled most medical aspects while Clara managed records, payments, and dispensing prescribed remedies. At noon, Eliza departed regretfully. I'd stay if I could, but James is hopeless with sick animals. If I don't help, we'll lose a valuable mar. We'll manage, Clara assured her, though uncertainty gnawed at her confidence as the afternoon patients began arriving. The first 2 appointments proceeded smoothly, both simple dressing changes that followed Dr. Wilson's detailed instructions. Exactly. Clara was just beginning to relax when the bell above the office door jangled and Jackson Miller himself entered, supporting a young ranch hand whose arm was wrapped in a blood-soaked cloth. My foreman, Miller announced without preamble. Caught his arm in machinery. Where's Wilson? Clara straightened, refusing to be intimidated by the man who had so publicly humiliated her. Dr. Wilson is attending the Harrison boy. I can help. Or send for him if necessary. Miller's expression darkened with recognition as he properly looked at her for the first time. You? What are you doing here? "Mrs. Bennett is my assistant," came a deep voice from behind them. Dr. Wilson stood in the doorway, his coat dusted with snow, medical bag in hand, and fully qualified to assess whether a situation requires my immediate attention. Relief flooded Clara, followed quickly by concern. "The Harrison boy?" "Improving. His fever broke an hour ago. His mother is with him now." His gaze shifted to the injured ranch hand. "Let's examine that arm." Miller withdrew as Dr. Wilson took charge, leading the young man to an examination room. Clara followed with clean bandages and instruments, leaving the rancher standing awkwardly in the waiting area. The injury proved serious but not life-threatening, a deep laceration requiring several stitches, but no damage to tendons or nerves. Clara assisted competently, handing instruments, preparing suture materials, and cleaning the wound as directed. The ranch hand, whose name was Thomas Givens, remained stoic throughout the procedure, thanking them profusely once his arm was neatly bandaged. "You'll need to rest that arm for at least 3 days," Dr. Wilson instructed. "No lifting, no rope work, minimal movement. Mrs. Bennett will prepare a tincture for pain." As Clara mixed the prescribed remedy, she overheard Miller's protests. In the waiting room, 3 days without my foreman? Impossible. The winter feed needs distributing, and we're short-handed as it is. Infection is a greater threat than delayed chores, Dr. Wilson replied firmly. Unless you prefer to risk losing him permanently to blood poisoning. Clara handed the tincture to Givens along with written instructions. 2 drops in water every 4 hours as needed for pain, she explained. Return in 3 days for Dr. Wilson to examine the wound sooner if you notice increased redness, swelling, or fever. After the ranch hand departed, Miller lingered, his discomfort evident as he shifted his weight from foot to foot. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Mrs. Bennett, I owe you an apology." Clara froze in the act of recording the treatment in the patient ledger. Of all the things she had expected from Jackson Miller, an apology ranked least likely. "My behavior upon your arrival was ungentlemanly," he continued stiffly. "I've since learned that your letter explaining the children's existence did indeed arrive but was misplaced by my housekeeper during a bout of influenza. She found it last week among papers she had set aside while ill." Clara set down her pen carefully. "I see. Had I known about the children from the beginning, I might have—" He stopped, perhaps realizing no version of that sentence improved. His standing. "You might have what, Mr. Miller?" Clara's voice remained steady despite the anger simmering beneath her composed exterior. "Rejected me by letter instead of in person? Saved us both the embarrassment of a public scene?" Miller flushed. "I merely meant, I believe Mrs. Bennett understands your meaning perfectly." Dr. Wilson interrupted, his tone deceptively mild, though Clara noted the tension in his jaw. "Your apology is noted. Now if you'll excuse us, we have other patients." Waiting. No other patients waited, in fact, but Miller didn't challenge the claim. With a stiff nod he departed, the bell jangling discordantly in his wake. Silence stretched between them until Clara spoke. "Thank you for your timely return, Doctor." "Fortuitous timing," he agreed, removing his coat. "Though from what I observed, you were handling Miller quite capably on your own." "Miller doesn't concern me," Clara replied, returning to her record-keeping. "Though I admit I was relieved to have your expertise for his foreman's injury. A deep laceration requires more skill than I currently possess." Dr. Wilson studied her for a moment, then made a decision. "Perhaps it's time to expand your medical training beyond basic procedures. You've mastered the administrative aspects more quickly than I anticipated." Clara looked up in surprise. "Would you teach me more advanced skills?" "If you're willing to learn," he replied. "Your steady hands and attention to detail would serve you well in medical practice, and having another trained person in Silver Creek would benefit the community, especially when I'm called away on distant cases." The offer stirred something in Clara that had lain dormant, Since her teaching days, intellectual curiosity, the satisfaction of mastering new knowledge. "I would be honored to learn whatever you're willing to teach," she said sincerely. His expression warmed. "We'll begin tomorrow then. Basic anatomy first, then common ailments and treatments." He glanced at the clock on the wall. "For now, I believe it's time to check on your children. They've been remarkably quiet all afternoon." Clara started, realizing the children had indeed been unusually subdued. Together they walked through the connecting passage to the residence, finding all 6 children engaged in various quiet activities, Matthew reading to Joseph and Emma, while Alice supervised the twins arranging wooden blocks into elaborate structures. The sight of her normally energetic children peacefully occupied brought a smile to Clara's face. "They're adapting well," she observed, watching as Emma toddled toward her with arms outstretched. "Children are resilient," Dr. Wilson remarked, "especially when they feel secure." He bent to admire the twins' block construction, asking questions that made Henry beam with pride. Clara watched the interaction with a sense of wonder. Thomas had loved their children but had rarely engaged with them directly, considering childcare primarily her domain. Dr. Wilson, by contrast, seemed genuinely interested in each child's thoughts and activities. As she prepared supper while the doctor entertained the younger children and Matthew set the table, Clara reflected on how quickly their lives had changed. 1 week ago, they had arrived in Silver Creek with nothing but hopes pinned to a stranger's promises. Now they were establishing a new life in this unexpected household, with daily routines and budding relationships that felt increasingly natural. The remainder of the evening passed pleasantly. After the younger children were tucked into bed, Clara joined Dr. Wilson in his study where he outlined the medical training he proposed. His enthusiasm for teaching matched her eagerness to learn, and they were soon deep in discussion about anatomy texts and practical demonstrations. "You have a quick mind, Mrs. Bennett," he observed as they reviewed a diagram of the circulatory system. "Catherine was the same way, always 3 steps ahead of my explanations." It was the first time he had voluntarily mentioned his wife in casual conversation. Clara looked up from the text, noting the bittersweet smile that crossed his features. "She sounds remarkable," Clara said gently. "She was," he agreed, gazing into the fire for a long moment, then visibly returned to the present. "As are you, Mrs. Bennett. Few women would have shown your resilience in the face of Miller's rejection, let alone built a new life so quickly." "Necessity is a powerful motivator," Clara replied, "and I had help." She hesitated, then added, softly, "Your kindness made all the difference." Their eyes met across the table, something unspoken passing between them. The moment lingered until Matthew appeared at the door, asking for help with one of his brothers. As Clara tended to her children's bedtime needs, her thoughts returned to that moment and the gradual transformation of her circumstances. 1 month ago, she had departed Ohio with little hope beyond securing basic survival for her children. She had arrived in Silver Creek to rejection and seeming disaster, yet somehow she now found herself in a comfortable home with meaningful work. Learning new skills under the guidance of a man who respected her intelligence and accepted, even welcomed her children. Was this merely fortunate coincidence, she wondered, or something more deliberate? The question followed her into dreams, where Samuel Wilson's amber eyes held promises she dared not interpret while awake. Morning brought a fresh perspective and new developments. Clara descended to the kitchen to find Dr. Wilson already dressed for the day. A letter opened before him at the breakfast table. "News?" she inquired, moving to prepare coffee. "From the Territorial Medical Board," he confirmed. "They're sending an inspector next month to evaluate rural practices. Standard procedure, but it means additional preparation." Clara nodded, mentally calculating what records would need organizing. "We'll be ready, with your help certainly." He hesitated, then continued. The inspector will expect a properly qualified assistant, someone with documented training. She paused in measuring coffee grounds. I have no formal medical training. But you have education and intelligence, he countered. And I have authority to train apprentices. With your permission, I'd like to register you officially as my medical apprentice. It would formalize the teaching I proposed yesterday. The offer startled her. Are women permitted as medical apprentices? The territorial statutes don't specify gender requirements for apprenticeship, he replied. Several female physicians practice in larger settlements farther east, all initially trained through similar arrangements. Clara considered the implications as she prepared breakfast. Medical apprenticeship represented a significant commitment beyond her current duties, more responsibility, more learning, perhaps eventually a professional identity beyond widow or mother. This isn't an obligation, Dr. Wilson added, sensing her hesitation. Merely an opportunity, if you wish to pursue it. Clara set a plate of eggs before him, her decision forming. I accept gratefully, though I expect the good people of Silver Creek may have opinions about a woman in such a role. Undoubtedly, he agreed with a wry smile. But they'll adapt, as they have to your presence here. Results speak louder than prejudice in frontier medicine. As they finished breakfast, a knock at the office door signaled the day's first patient. Clara rose to answer it, her step lighter than it had been in months. The path ahead remained uncertain, with challenges she could only dimly foresee. But for the first time since being widowed, she faced the future with something beyond resignation, with genuine hope and purpose. Samuel Wilson watched her go, a complex emotion crossing his features before he too rose to begin the day's work. Not as solitary physician, but as mentor and perhaps in time, something more. Spring arrived in Montana Territory with surprising swiftness, melting snow into muddy streets and coaxing tentative green shoots from the thawing earth. 3 months had passed since Clara's arrival in Silver Creek, transforming her from rejected mail-order bride to respected medical apprentice. Transition that drew increasing attention as her new role became evident to the wider community. On this particular April morning, Clara moved efficiently through the doctor's office, preparing for the day's appointments while Dr. Wilson made house calls to several outlying farms. The children, now settled into a comfortable routine, were at various activities. Matthew and Alice attended the town school, while the twins and Joseph played in their specially constructed area in the corner of the office. Emma napped in a cradle nearby, a compromise that allowed Clara to work while keeping the youngest children under constant supervision. The bell above the door chimed, announcing the first patient of the day. Clara looked up, expecting Mrs. Thompson, who was scheduled for a pregnancy examination. Instead, 3 women entered: Victoria Miller, sister to Jackson, flanked by Eleanor Campbell, wife of the bank manager, and Frances Wilson, no relation to the doctor, the mayor's wife. Good morning, ladies, Clara greeted them with professional courtesy, though wariness tightened her shoulders. This unlikely delegation had never before graced the doctor's office as a group. How may I assist you? We've come to see Dr. Wilson, Victoria Miller announced, her pinched features conveying disapproval as her gaze traveled from Clara to the children and back, on a matter of community concern. The doctor is making house calls this morning. Clara replied, maintaining her composure. He should return by noon. I'd be happy to schedule an appointment, or I can assist with minor medical concerns in his absence. Eleanor Campbell sniffed audibly. This is precisely our concern, a woman presuming to provide medical care without proper training. Clara straightened, meeting their gazes directly. I serve as Dr. Wilson's apprentice, a position recognized by territorial statute. Any medical care I provide is under his direct supervision. Apprentice? Frances Wilson exclaimed. Women don't become doctors, Mrs. Bennett. It's unnatural. Several female physicians practice throughout the territory, Clara countered evenly. Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell graduated from medical college nearly 30 years ago, opening the profession to qualified women. Silver Creek is not New York City, Victoria Miller interjected. Our community has standards of propriety. A woman living unchaperoned in a man's home, handling intimate medical matters. It creates talk. The implication was unmistakable. Heat rose in Clara's cheeks, but she refused to be intimidated. My position here is entirely professional. Mrs. Miller, Dr. Wilson provides separate living quarters for me and my children, as any reputable employer would. Nevertheless, Eleanor Campbell continued, we represent the Ladies' Aid Society, and we've come to express concern about the example this arrangement sets for impressionable young women in our community. Clara arched an eyebrow. The example of a widowed mother supporting her children through respectable employment, or the example of a woman pursuing education to better serve her community. The women exchanged glances, clearly unprepared for direct confrontation. Frances Wilson recovered first. We merely suggest that conventional employment would be more appropriate. The school board is seeking a teacher's assistant. The position would better suit your prior experience and a woman's natural temperament. At half the compensation, Clara noted, with no accommodation for my children during working hours. Your concern for my welfare is touching, but unnecessary. Before the conversation could continue, the door opened again, admitting Eliza Dawson and Margaret Caldwell, both carrying covered dishes. We brought lunch, Margaret announced cheerfully, then paused, taking in the tense tableau. Ladies, what a surprise to find you here. None of your family members have fallen ill, I hope? The shift in atmosphere was immediate and telling. Margaret Caldwell, as the doctor's longtime friend and a respected founding resident of Silver Creek, wielded considerable social influence that clearly matched or exceeded that of the current visitors. We came to discuss a matter of community standards, Victoria Miller replied stiffly. How thoughtful, Margaret set her dish on a side table with deliberate calm. Though I can't imagine what standards apply to medical care beyond competence and compassion, both of which Clara and Samuel provide in abundance. It's the arrangement that concerns us, Eleanor Campbell clarified, her confidence visibly weakening under Margaret's steady gaze. A young widow living in a bachelor's home, apprenticing in medicine. It's highly irregular. Margaret's expression hardened imperceptibly. So was typhoid fever taking half our children before Samuel established his practice here. So was women dying in childbirth before they had access to proper medical care. If irregular arrangements save lives, I'll champion them gladly over outdated proprieties. An uncomfortable silence fell, broken only by Joseph's laughter as he played with wooden blocks. The moment's tension dissipated as all eyes turned to the happy child, several women, including Frances Wilson, instinctively smiling at his innocent joy. The children are thriving under your care, Clara, Eliza observed, moving to admire Joseph's block tower. And the office runs more smoothly than I've ever seen it. The subtle reinforcement of Clara's positive impact wasn't lost on the visitors. Victoria Miller adjusted her shawl, clearly recognizing that this confrontation wouldn't yield her desired outcome. We've expressed our concerns. The Ladies' Aid Society will be discussing this matter further at our next meeting. Splendid, Margaret replied pleasantly. I look forward to attending as founding treasurer. I've been remiss in my participation lately. The three women departed shortly thereafter, leaving Clara, Eliza, and Margaret in a moment of shared triumph that quickly dissolved into laughter once the door closed. Their faces when you mentioned being founding treasurer, Eliza chuckled, as if they'd forgotten who established the society in the first place. Convenient memories, Margaret agreed, unpacking the lunch she'd brought: fresh bread, sliced ham, and early spring greens from her cold frame. Though we shouldn't underestimate Victoria Miller's determination. She's never forgiven Samuel for choosing to marry Catherine instead of her 20 years ago. Clara looked up in surprise from where she'd knelt to praise Joseph's architectural efforts. I hadn't realized there was history there. Ancient history, Margaret waved dismissively. But Victoria harbors grudges like others collect china figurines. Your presence here, young, intelligent, clearly valued by Samuel, has rekindled her resentment. Dr. Wilson and I maintain a strictly professional relationship, Clara felt compelled to clarify, though a warmth spread across her cheeks that suggested complexity beneath the statement. Eliza and Margaret exchanged knowing glances that Clara pretended not to notice. Professional or not, Eliza said practically, you've revitalized this practice. Patients who previously avoided medical care now come regularly, especially women. And mothers with young children. And Samuel smiles again, Margaret added softly. That alone would earn you the undying enmity of Victoria Miller, who spent 6 years offering comfort to the grieving widower without receiving so much as a second glance. This new understanding of the morning's confrontation left Clara unsettled. Throughout the afternoon, as she assisted patients, recorded treatments, and managed the increasingly busy office, her mind returned repeatedly to Margaret's casual mention of Dr. Wilson smiling again, and the implication that she was somehow responsible. Did others in town share Victoria Miller's suspicions about her relationship with the doctor? The thought troubled her. Clara had built a new life centered on independence and professional respect, far removed from her original purpose in coming to Silver Creek. The last thing she wanted was speculation that undermined her hard-won position or complicated her working relationship with Samuel Wilson. Yet she couldn't deny that the relationship had evolved beyond employer and employee. Their evenings often extended long after the children were asleep, sharing medical texts or discussing interesting cases. He treated her more as colleague than servant, valuing her observations and encouraging her growing knowledge. And sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, she caught expressions on his face that stirred feelings she'd believed buried with Thomas. The doctor returned mid-afternoon, removing his coat and hat as he entered through the private entrance, connecting the house to the office. Clara was preparing a tincture for a patient's cough, but felt immediately aware of his presence in a way that confirmed her earlier concerns. Mrs. Bennett, he greeted her, his voice warming the professional address. Anything requiring my immediate attention? Several messages, she replied, completing the preparation. And Eliza and Margaret brought lunch. There's plenty left if you're hungry. Once the patient departed with medicine and instructions. For care, Clara briefed Dr. Wilson on the morning's appointments and messages. She hesitated before mentioning the delegation's visit, unsure how to frame their concerns without creating awkwardness. He noticed her hesitation immediately. Something else happened. What is it? The Ladies' Aid Society sent representatives, Clara admitted. Mrs. Miller, Mrs. Campbell, and Mrs. Wilson expressed concerns about the propriety of our working arrangement. His expression darkened. Victoria Miller's doing, no doubt. What precisely were these concerns? Clara smoothed her apron unnecessarily. That a woman shouldn't practice medicine. That my living here sets a poor example. That our arrangement appears improper. I see. His jaw tightened. And your response? I explained that my position is professional and recognized by territorial statute. Eliza and Margaret arrived fortuitously and offered additional perspective. Clara managed a small smile. I believe the delegation retreated in strategic disorder. Dr. Wilson's tension visibly eased. Margaret can be formidable when defending those she cares about. She mentioned something interesting, Clara ventured. Curiosity overcoming caution. That Mrs. Miller once had expectations regarding you. He looked genuinely surprised, then understanding dawned. Ah, ancient history from before I met Catherine. Victoria's father suggested an arrangement between our families that never progressed beyond preliminary discussions. I see, Clara replied, relieved by his dismissive tone, yet still troubled. Nevertheless, I wouldn't want gossip to damage your standing in the community or the practice's reputation. Dr. Wilson studied her for a long moment. Are you concerned? About your own reputation, Mrs. Bennett, or mine? Both, she admitted. I've worked hard to establish myself here. You've given me opportunities I never imagined possible. I wouldn't want misperceptions to jeopardize either. His expression softened. Clara, he said, using her given name for the first time. Frontier communities run on practical realities, not social niceties. Your work here speaks for itself. Anyone truly concerned about community welfare recognizes the value you bring to this practice. The use of her first name shifted something between them, an acknowledgement of connection beyond professional courtesy. Clara felt it like a physical change in the air, both welcome and unsettling. Perhaps, she conceded, but perception often overshadows reality, especially where women's reputations are concerned. Then we address it directly, he decided, his tone turning brisk. I've been invited to speak at this Sunday's church service about spring health precautions. I'll use the opportunity to formally introduce you as my registered medical apprentice. Public acknowledgement should quell the worst of the gossip. The solution was practical and sensible, exactly what she would expect from him. Clara nodded. Agreement, pushing aside the complicated feelings their conversation had stirred. Sunday arrived clear and warm, drawing nearly the entire settlement to the white clapboard church at the end of Main Street. Clara sat with her children in a pew near the front, the younger ones unusually subdued in their Sunday best, though Joseph fidgeted against the confinement of the formal setting. Reverend Thomas delivered a brief sermon on renewal and growth. Before introducing Dr. Wilson to speak on seasonal health matters, Clara listened attentively as he discussed precautions against spring illnesses, proper nutrition after winter's limited diet, and the importance of cleaning water sources contaminated by snow melt. Finally, he concluded, I wish to make a formal announcement regarding my medical practice. As many of you know, Mrs. Clara Bennett has been assisting me these past 3 months, bringing welcome organization and additional care to our community. Today, I'm pleased to announce that the Territorial Medical Board has approved Mrs. Bennett's registration as an official medical apprentice under my supervision. A murmur rippled through the congregation. Clara kept her expression composed despite feeling every eye upon her. This appointment recognizes Mrs. Bennett's intelligence, dedication, and natural healing abilities. Dr. Wilson continued, Silver Creek will benefit greatly from having additional medical expertise, particularly for women's concerns and children's ailments. I hope you'll join me in congratulating her on this achievement. He gestured for Clara to stand. She did so reluctantly, one hand on Joseph's shoulder to keep him seated. The congregation's response was mixed. Some applauded politely, others whispered behind raised hands, and a few, notably Victoria Miller and her companions, sat with stony expressions. Mrs. Bennett will increasingly handle routine cases independently, Dr. Wilson explained, allowing me to devote more time to serious conditions and distant homesteads where medical care has been limited. This arrangement expands medical services available to all residents of Silver Creek and surrounding areas. His framing was masterful, Clara realized, positioning her role as community benefit rather than personal advancement, emphasizing practical advantages that even the most traditional residents would find difficult to dismiss. By the time they exited the church, several women had approached to congratulate her, including some who had previously kept their distance. Well handled, Margaret murmured as they walked home for Sunday dinner. Samuel always did know how to manage public opinion when it mattered to him. The medical benefits are genuine, Clara pointed out. It's not merely a matter of impression. Of course, Margaret agreed. But make no mistake, my friend rarely makes public pronouncements unless something matters deeply to him. The implication lingered in Clara's mind throughout dinner and into the evening as she prepared for the coming week's appointments. If her position truly mattered deeply to Samuel Wilson beyond practical considerations, what did that suggest about his feelings toward her? The question remained unanswered as Monday dawned bright and busy. Clara focused on work, pushing personal considerations aside as patient after patient arrived seeking treatment for various spring ailments. By mid-afternoon, she had independently handled a dozen minor cases, feeling growing confidence in her medical judgment. As the last scheduled patient departed, the office door opened again, admitting Jackson Miller. Clara straightened, surprised by his unexpected appearance. "Mr. Miller," she acknowledged coolly. "How may we assist you?" "I need to speak with Wilson," he replied tersely. "Privately. Dr. Wilson is performing a minor surgery. He should be finished shortly." Clara gestured to the waiting area. "You're welcome to wait." Miller remained standing, his expression unusually agitated. "I'll wait in his private office." "I'm afraid that's not possible," Clara countered firmly. "Patient records and confidential correspondence are kept there." Anger flashed across Miller's face. "You presume to dictate terms to me? You're nothing but a glorified nurse playing at medicine while living under a man's roof without the benefit of marriage. Don't overestimate your position in this town, Mrs. Bennett." The attack was so unexpected and virulent that Clara momentarily lost her composure. She took a steadying breath before responding. "Your personal opinion of me is irrelevant, Mr. Miller. Office procedures apply equally to everyone, regardless of their standing in Silver Creek." "We'll see about that," Miller muttered. "Things are changing. Your unnatural arrangement with Wilson won't continue unchallenged." Before Clara could respond, Dr. Wilson emerged from the surgery, removing a blood-stained apron and washing his hands thoroughly at the basin. His expression darkened as he took in Miller's hostile stance and Clara's rigid posture. "Miller," he acknowledged curtly, "what brings you here?" "A matter requiring private discussion," Miller replied, "regarding certain investments and community concerns." Dr. Wilson dried his hands methodically. "Mrs. Bennett has my complete confidence. Anything you wish to discuss can be said in her presence." The rancher's jaw tightened. "Very well. The town council met yesterday evening. There's a movement to enforce certain moral standards for businesses operating in Silver Creek, particularly those serving vulnerable populations." "Meaning?" Dr. Wilson prompted, though his expression suggested he already understood the implication. "Meaning your living and working arrangements with Mrs. Bennett have raised concerns about the propriety of your medical practice," Miller stated bluntly. "Either formalize your relationship through marriage, replace her with a male assistant, or face the possibility of official censure from the council." Shock rendered Clara momentarily speechless. The ultimatum laid bare the extent of opposition to her position and the limited options for addressing it. Dr. Wilson, however, appeared more angry than surprised. "The council has no authority over medical licensure or practice. That falls under territorial jurisdiction." "True," Miller conceded with a thin smile, "but the council approves all business licenses within town limits. Your office operates under such a license renewal due next month." The implicit threat hung in the air. Without a business license, Dr. Wilson could continue practicing medicine but would be forced to relocate his office outside town boundaries, a significant hardship for both him and his patients. "Who exactly comprises this movement?" Dr. Wilson demanded. "You and whoever else holds debt at the bank. Or is the Blackwater Mining Company applying pressure again for your support of their company clinic proposal?" Miller's expression confirmed the accuracy of at least one assumption. Various concerned citizens share these views, including prominent church members, business leaders, and the Ladies' Aid Society. "How convenient that moral outrage aligns so perfectly with business interests," Dr. Wilson observed coldly. "The council meets next Friday, correct? I'll address these concerns formally at that time." "As is your right," Miller acknowledged. but be prepared for public discussion of matters you might prefer kept private. His gaze shifted meaningfully to Clara before he departed, leaving tension thick in his wake. When the door closed behind him, Clara finally found her voice. "I'm so sorry. I never intended to create such difficulties for you or the practice you've built." "You've created nothing," Dr. Wilson replied firmly. "This is about control, not morality. Miller's never forgiven me for purchasing the land he wanted for expansion when I first arrived in Silver Creek. The Blackwater situation merely adds current motivation to old grudges." Clara shook her head, unconvinced. "Nevertheless, your practice shouldn't suffer because of my presence." "Perhaps I should." "Don't," he interrupted, his voice softening as he moved closer. "Don't suggest leaving, Clara. Whatever Miller and his allies attempt, we'll face it together." The conviction in his voice steadied her, but the rancher's ultimatum echoed in her mind. Either formalize your relationship through marriage, replace her with a male assistant, or face official censure. The options felt equally impossible, and the coming confrontation unavoidable. The week leading up to the town council meeting passed in a storm of activity. Word of Jackson Miller's ultimatum spread through Silver Creek with the speed of prairie fire, dividing the community into factions. While Clara maintained professional composure during office hours, privately she battled waves of anxiety about the impending confrontation and its potential consequences. On Thursday afternoon, as the last patient departed, Clara closed the office ledger with uncharacteristic force. "This is absurd," she declared, turning to Dr. Wilson, who was organizing surgical instruments in the adjacent room. "The council meeting tomorrow will be about me, not the practice. My presence is causing division in a community that accepted you without question for 20 years. Dr. Wilson looked up, his expression somber. "This isn't about you, Clara. It's about power and who wields it in Silver Creek, Miller and his allies are using our arrangement as convenient leverage for broader aims." "Nevertheless, I'm the leverage they're using," she countered, moving to stand in the doorway. "I've been thinking about Margaret's offer." His brow furrowed. "What offer?" "To manage her store while Robert attends university in Helena this fall. The position includes accommodation for me and the children upstairs." Clara's voice remained steady despite the tightness in her chest. "It would eliminate the immediate pretext for opposition to your practice." Dr. Wilson set down the instruments with deliberate care. For a long moment he remained silent, his back to her as he seemingly studied the contents of the medical cabinet. When he finally spoke, his voice carried an edge she'd never heard before. "Is that what you want, Clara? To abandon your medical training? To retreat into conventional women's work because a few small-minded individuals object to your advancement?" "Of course not," she replied, stung by his characterization. "I found purpose and fulfillment in this work that I never imagined possible. But I won't be the cause of destroying what you've built here." He turned then, crossing the distance between them with purposeful strides. "You've become essential to what we're building here, not just to the practice, but to the community's health. Every woman who brings her children to you rather than suffering in silence, every expectant mother who receives proper care because she trusts you, they matter more than Miller's machinations." The intensity in his amber eyes held her immobile. They stood barely a foot apart, closer than propriety would strictly allow, close enough that Clara could detect the faint scent of the carbolic soap he used after examinations. "Samuel," she said softly, using his given name for the first time. "I don't want to leave, but I see no acceptable alternative." His expression shifted at the sound of his name on her lips. "There is another option," he said, voice dropping, to match her quiet tone. "One I've considered for weeks but hesitated to propose for fear of appearing to take advantage of your situation." Clara's pulse quickened as she grasped his meaning. "Marriage?" She whispered, "Yes." His gaze remained steady on hers. "Not as Miller's ultimatum demands, but as a partnership of equals. Your medical apprenticeship would continue, your children would have stability, and together we could build something meaningful here in Silver Creek. A marriage of convenience, Clara stated, needing clarity despite the sudden hollowness in her chest. No, Samuel shook his head firmly. A marriage of choice, of mutual respect of, he paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. Of growing affection, at least on my part. The admission hung between them, altering the atmosphere as surely as storm clouds transform a summer sky. Clara struggled to form a response, her carefully maintained composure fragmenting under the weight of his words and her own conflicted emotions. I need time, she finally managed. This is unexpected. Understanding crossed his features as he stepped back, restoring the proper distance between them. Of course. Take whatever time you need. My proposal stands independent of tomorrow's council meeting, which I'll handle regardless of your decision. Clara nodded gratefully, though confusion still clouded her thoughts. I should check on the children, she murmured, retreating toward the connecting passage to their living quarters. Clara, Samuel called softly as she reached the door. She paused without turning. Whatever you decide, your position here is secure. I'll contest any attempt to separate you from the work you've come to love. His promise followed her through the evening as she tended to the children, prepared dinner, and moved through the domestic routines that punctuated her days. After the children were asleep, she sat alone in the small sitting room adjoining her bedroom, a medical text opened but unread in her lap. Marriage to Samuel Wilson. The prospect simultaneously terrified and attracted her. Their professional partnership had evolved into genuine friendship over the past months. She respected his intelligence, admired his dedication to his patients, appreciated his acceptance of her children. But marriage meant vulnerability of a different kind, opening herself to potential heartbreak should his growing affection prove insufficient foundation for lifelong commitment. Her first marriage, though brief, had been built on romantic love. Thomas Bennett had courted her properly, won her heart with promises of a future that included children and companionship. His death had shattered that vision, leaving Clara to navigate widowhood and motherhood simultaneously. Would marriage to Samuel offer security without love, or could respect and shared purpose evolve into deeper attachment? And did she even want that possibility, with the risk of loss it inevitably carried? Sleep eluded her long into the night as she weighed options and examined her own conflicted heart. Dawn found her still undecided, but determined to face the council meeting with dignity, regardless of personal turmoil. Friday dawned bright and unseasonably warm for late April. Clara dressed with particular care in her best navy dress, with white collar and cuffs, her auburn hair arranged in a simple but elegant knot. The outfit projected capability and respectability qualities she would need in abundance at the afternoon's confrontation. The morning passed in a blur of patience and preparations. Samuel was unusually quiet, respecting her need for space to consider his proposal. Margaret arrived shortly before noon to watch the younger children during the meeting, greeting Clara with a worried smile. Half the town will be there, she informed them over a hasty lunch. Miller has been rallying supporters all week, but you have allies too. Every woman you've treated is speaking in your defense. I appreciate their support, Clara replied, though I regret putting them in the position of opposing established authorities. Margaret snorted indelicately. Established authorities need opposing when they overstep. Jackson Miller may own the largest ranch in the county, but that doesn't give him the right to dictate how people live or work. At precisely 2 o'clock, Clara and Samuel entered Silver Creek's town hall, a modest building adjacent to the church. The meeting room was already filled to capacity, townspeople packed onto wooden benches with barely room to shift position. A raised platform at the front held a long table where the 5 council members sat with varying expressions of discomfort or determination. Mayor Wilson occupied the center position, flanked by Jackson Miller and bank manager William Campbell. On one side, blacksmith Joseph Davis and farmer Elias Thompson on the other. The composition suggested a divided council, two merchants aligned with Miller's interests, two working men who might prove more sympathetic to practical considerations. Clara and Samuel found seats near the front, courtesy of Eliza Dawson, who had saved places for them. As they settled, Clara felt dozens of gazes upon them, some supportive, others openly hostile. Victoria Miller, seated prominently in the front row opposite them, made no attempt to hide her contemptuous scrutiny. Mayor Wilson called the meeting to order with obvious reluctance. "We gather to address concerns raised regarding certain businesses and practices within town limits," he began diplomatically. "Specifically whether particular arrangements at Dr. Wilson's medical practice meet community standards expected of Silver Creek establishments." "Speak plainly, Wilson," Miller interrupted. "The issue is whether a woman with no medical credentials should be permitted to practice medicine while living unchaperoned in a bachelor's home. It's a matter of public health and public morality." Samuel rose immediately, his composure unwavering despite the provocation. "If we are speaking plainly, let's acknowledge what this is really about. Mrs. Bennett is formally registered with the Territorial Medical Board as my apprentice, a legal position recognized throughout Montana Territory. Her presence in my household is as a respected employee with separate living quarters." "Separate quarters under the same roof," Campbell interjected, "which creates the appearance of impropriety, regardless of actual arrangements." "I wasn't aware the council regulated appearances rather than actions," Samuel countered evenly. "Mrs. Bennett's character is beyond reproach. Her work has substantially improved medical care available to this community, particularly for women and children who previously suffered in silence rather than consult a male physician." Clara maintained a dignified expression despite her discomfort at being discussed as though absent. Around the room, she noted several women nodding agreement with Samuel's assessment, mothers whose children she had treated, expectant women she had guided through pregnancy complications. "No one questions Mrs. Bennett's technical competence," Miller stated dismissively. "The issue is propriety. Silver Creek businesses must maintain standards that reflect our community values. A woman living in a man's household without the benefit of marriage or family relationship violates those standards." "Does it indeed?" The new voice came from Margaret Caldwell, who had risen from her seat near the back. "If so, I must be violating standards as well, housing single men and women under one roof at my store." "That's different," Victoria Miller objected immediately. "Commercial lodgings have established protocols and separate facilities." "As does my brother-in-law's residence," Margaret countered. "The real difference is that Clara Bennett threatens certain people's assumptions about women's proper place." The exchange ignited a wave of comments from the assembled crowd, voices rising as people took sides. Mayor Wilson banged his gavel repeatedly, struggling to restore order. In the momentary lull that followed, Clara made her decision. She stood, smoothing her skirts with steady hands before addressing the council directly. "Gentlemen, if I may speak on my own behalf." Mayor Wilson nodded, relief evident in his expression at having someone new take the floor. "Proceed, Mrs. Bennett." Clara surveyed the room, drawing strength from the supportive faces among the hostile ones. "I came to Silver Creek as a widow with 6 children, seeking security through marriage to Mr. Jackson Miller, who had advertised for a bride in Eastern newspapers." A ripple of reaction passed through the crowd at this direct reference to her. Initial rejection. Miller's face darkened, but Clara continued undeterred. "Upon arrival, I found my circumstances misunderstood and my children unwelcome. When that arrangement failed, Dr. Wilson offered employment that recognized my educational background and provided accommodations suitable for a woman with young children." Her steady gaze moved from face to face among the council members. "During these past 4 months, I have assisted with dozens of medical cases, maintained precise records of treatments and outcomes, and studied extensively to increase my knowledge of modern medical practice. Women who previously avoided treatment now seek care regularly. Children receive prompt attention for injuries and illnesses. Clara paused, drawing a deep breath before continuing with measured certainty. I understand concerns about appearances. Propriety matters in close communities. But surely substance matters more than appearance. The question before you isn't whether our arrangement looks conventional, but whether it serves the greater good of Silver Creek citizens. The silence that followed her statement felt charged with possibility. She remained standing, shoulders straight, gaze steady, presenting herself not as a woman seeking approval, but as a professional defending her right to serve. Blacksmith Joseph Davis broke the silence, addressing his fellow council members. My wife Mary wouldn't be alive without Mrs. Bennett's quick thinking when she hemorrhaged after our last baby came. Doc Wilson was 10 miles away at the Jensen place. Mrs. Bennett knew exactly what to do, saved Mary's life before he could even get there. His weathered face hardened as he looked at Miller. I don't much care about appearances when weighed against my wife's life. Farmer Thompson nodded agreement. My Abigail won't see any doctor but Mrs. Bennett for her female complaints. Says she suffered for years before having someone she could speak to openly. Mayor Wilson, sensing the council's division and the community sentiment, attempted compromise. Perhaps a formal chaperoning arrangement could address the propriety concerns while allowing Mrs. Bennett's valuable work to continue. Or perhaps, Samuel said, rising to stand beside Clara, a more permanent solution is appropriate. He turned to face her directly, taking her hands in his. Clara Bennett, I intended a more private setting for this, but circumstances demand directness. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife partner in life, as you've become partner in my practice? Gasps and murmurs erupted around the room. Clara's eyes widened at the public proposal, so different from their private discussion. Yet as she looked into Samuel's face, she saw not calculation but genuine emotion, affection, respect, and something deeper that stirred answering feelings. In her own heart, in that moment of connection, her doubts dissolved like morning mist under Montana sunshine. This was no marriage of convenience or strategic alliance, but the natural culmination of a relationship built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and growing attachment that she now recognized had matured into love on both sides. Yes, she replied. With quiet certainty, I will. The simple acceptance transformed the atmosphere instantly. Applause broke out from supporters, while even critics appeared mollified by the prospect of convention being satisfied. Only Victoria Miller maintained her stony expression, rising abruptly to exit the hall with dramatic indignation. Mayor Wilson seized the opportunity to conclude the contentious meeting. Well, it appears concerns about propriety will be addressed through the most traditional means possible. Unless there are objections, I propose we consider this matter resolved and move to regularly scheduled business. As the meeting shifted to mundane town matters, Clara and Samuel slipped outside into the afternoon sunshine, still holding hands as they walked slowly toward home. That was quite a performance, Clara said when they were beyond earshot of the hall, though I can't help wondering if you felt pressured by circumstances to make such a public declaration. Samuel stopped walking, turning to face her fully. The public setting was expedient, I admit, but the sentiment behind it was entirely genuine. His eyes held hers with unwavering sincerity. I've known since you stood up to Miller that first day that you were a woman of exceptional character. What I couldn't have anticipated was how completely you would transform not just my practice, but my life. Clara felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. I came to Silver Creek seeking security, expecting to sacrifice independence for stability. Instead, I found a partnership I never imagined possible, professional and personal. Is that a yes under less dramatic circumstances? Samuel asked, a hint of vulnerability beneath his calm exterior. In answer, Clara rose on tiptoes to press a gentle kiss to his cheek, her first such gesture, shocking in its public setting, yet perfect in its timing. "It's a yes without reservation or condition," she confirmed softly. "Not for appearance or convenience, but because I've discovered that the heart can heal and open again to possibilities I thought forever lost." Their return to the doctor's residence, soon to be their shared home in truth as well as appearance, was accompanied by congratulatory calls from neighbors and patients who had witnessed the proposal. Margaret greeted them at the door, her knowing smile suggesting she had anticipated this outcome long before either of them had recognized its inevitability. Inside, the children were engaged in various activities, unaware that their world had just shifted axis once again. Matthew looked up from helping Joseph with a wooden puzzle, his perceptive eyes immediately noting the changed atmosphere. "What happened?" he asked directly, with the forthright manner of a child who had shouldered adult responsibilities far too young. Clara knelt before her oldest son, taking his hands in hers. "Dr. Wilson has asked me to marry him, and I've accepted. He'll be your stepfather, if that meets with your approval." Matthew studied Samuel thoughtfully, with a gravity beyond his years. "Will we still live here? Will you still teach my mother about medicine?" "Yes to both," Samuel replied seriously. "Your mother's too fine a medical apprentice to lose. And this house needs a family to make it a home again." The boy considered this, then nodded once. "Good. She smiles more since we came here." The simple observation brought unexpected tears to Clara's eyes. She hadn't realized how visible her growing happiness had been to her perceptive son. As she gathered her other children to share the news, Alice's immediate excitement, the twins' practical questions about whether they would need to move rooms, Joseph's concern only about whether his blocks would stay in the office, and Emma's complete indifference to anything beyond her immediate desire to be held, Clara marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. From rejected mail-order bride to respected medical apprentice to future wife and partner, each apparent setback revealing itself as a step toward unexpected happiness. "We'll need to write to the Territorial Medical Board," Samuel said pragmatically, though his eyes remained soft as he watched Clara with her children. "Your apprenticeship status changes somewhat as my wife, but there are precedents for husband-wife medical practices throughout the territory." "Practical considerations already?" Clara teased, lifting Emma as the little girl demanded attention. "Professional and personal," Samuel replied with a smile that transformed his serious features. "That's our partnership, isn't it? In all aspects of life." The simple truth of his statement settled over Clara like a benediction. Whatever challenges lay ahead, from Miller's continued opposition to the everyday difficulties of frontier medicine, they would face them together. Their unexpected family forged not from conventional beginnings, but from mutual respect, shared purpose, and love that had bloomed in the most unlikely soil. The Silver Creek Church had never looked more beautiful than on this early June morning. Wildflowers gathered from the surrounding prairie filled simple mason jars along the pews, their vibrant colors standing bright against the whitewashed walls. Sunlight streamed through windows thrown open to catch the gentle breeze, carrying the sweet scent of early summer across the gathered congregation. Clara stood in the small antechamber, Margaret Caldwell making final adjustments to her dress ivory silk that had once belonged to Margaret's sister Catherine, carefully altered to fit Clara's slighter frame. The past 6 weeks since the town council meeting had passed in a whirlwind of preparation, both for the wedding and for the expansion of the medical practice that would follow. "Catherine would be pleased," Margaret said softly, smoothing the delicate lace at the collar. She always hoped Samuel would find happiness again. "I wish I could have known her," Clara replied, touching the cameo brooch Margaret had insisted she wear, a family heirloom passing from one Wilson bride to the next. "From everything you've shared, we would have been friends." Sisters more likely, Margaret nodded, blinking rapidly to control emotion with practiced dignity. You share her practical nature and her unwillingness to accept arbitrary limitations. She stepped back to assess the final effect. Perfect. Now are the children ready for their grand entrance? Clara smiled, glancing to where her children sat in their finest clothes, unusually clean and presentable, thanks to Margaret's careful preparations. Matthew, solemn in his first suit, would walk his mother down the aisle. Alice, the twins, Joseph, and even little Emma would participate in the ceremony, each carrying a small posy of wildflowers. As ready as they'll ever be, Clara replied, though I suspect Joseph will attempt an escape the moment the ceremony begins. Eliza's husband is prepared for interception, Margaret assured her with a chuckle. That boy has energy enough for 3 children. A gentle knock at the door announced Reverend Thomas, his kind face appearing around the edge as he entered. It's time, Mrs. Bennett. Dr. Wilson appears to be wearing a groove in the floorboards with his pacing. Clara took a deep, steadying breath. Unlike her first wedding, a small solemn affair overshadowed by wartime anxieties, the ceremony represented not desperate hope, but confident certainty. She had come to know Samuel Wilson through daily interaction, professional partnership, and quiet evenings of conversation. Their foundation was built not on romantic illusion, but on mutual respect, shared purpose, and affection that had deepened into love through time and understanding. I'm ready, she said, gathering her simple bouquet of prairie roses. The small church had filled to capacity, townspeople crowding the pews in their Sunday finest. Clara noted with satisfaction that the attendance included not just supporters, but former critics as well, all save Victoria Miller, whose conspicuous absence surprised no one. Even Jackson Miller sat in a back pew, his expression unreadable, but his presence a tacit acknowledgement that Silver Creek had accepted this unconventional union. Samuel waited at the altar, tall and distinguished in his best black suit, his normally serious expression transformed by barely contained joy, as Clara proceeded slowly down the aisle on Matthew's arm. Behind her came her other children, each bearing their small part in the ceremony with varying degrees of solemnity and fidgeting. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful, traditional vows spoken with quiet conviction by both bride and groom. When Reverend Thomas invited Samuel to kiss his bride, the gentle touch of his lips against hers felt like both culmination and beginning, closing one chapter of their story while opening another filled with promise. As they turned to face the congregation as husband and wife, Joseph broke free from Alice's grasp, running with remarkable speed toward his mother and new stepfather. The laughter that rippled through the assembly dispelled any remaining formality as Samuel scooped up the determined child, including him in their first moments as a family. The celebration continued at their home, now officially the Wilson family residence, where tables had been set up in the garden for a community feast. Women from across Silver Creek had contributed dishes, creating a spread that represented the town's diverse cultural heritage. Children played games on the lawn while adults mingled, conversations flowing more easily across social boundaries than ever before. Clara found herself continuously surrounded by well-wishers, many expressing genuine gratitude for her medical work. Mrs. Davis, whose life she had saved during childbirth, proudly displayed her healthy 2-month-old daughter. Farmers' wives, who had previously suffered in silence with women's complaints, pressed her hands and whispered thanks for discreet treatments that had improved their quality of life. Even Mayor Wilson's wife, once part of the opposition delegation, approached with grudging respect. I may have misjudged your intentions, Mrs. Wilson, she acknowledged stiffly. Your care for my granddaughter's measles was exemplary. Professional intentions often transcend personal differences, Clara replied diplomatically. I'm gratified your granddaughter recovered fully. As afternoon mellowed toward evening, the gathering gradually diminished as families with young children departed for home. Samuel found Clara sitting on the garden bench, watching Margaret supervise the twins' interaction with other children. "Happy?" he asked, joining her with 2 glasses of Mrs. Thompson's renowned elderberry wine. "Completely," Clara confirmed, accepting the glass and leaning slightly against his shoulder, though I confessed to some trepidation about tomorrow. Tomorrow would bring significant changes to their professional lives. With their marriage official, Clara's status would shift from apprentice to partner in the practice. The territorial medical supervisor was scheduled to visit, formalizing her expanded role and approving new credentials that would allow her to treat patients independently, while continuing her medical education. "Dr. Reynolds is progressive in his views," Samuel assured her. "He supervised a husband-wife practice in Helena for years before accepting the territorial position. Your qualifications speak for themselves." Clara sipped her wine thoughtfully. "It's not just the inspection. The arrival of Dr. Andrews next month means even greater changes to our practice. The recruitment of young Dr. Michael Andrews, recently graduated from medical school in Chicago, had been Samuel's inspiration. The new physician would manage routine cases in town, freeing Samuel to establish regular circuits to outlying homesteads and mining camps where medical care had been sporadic at best. Clara would focus increasingly on women's and children's medicine, creating a specialized practice unique in the territory. "Change brings opportunity," Samuel reminded her, his fingers intertwining with hers. "Andrew's presence means expanded care for the entire region while allowing us more predictable schedules and time for our family." "Our family," Clara repeated softly, her gaze finding her children, who were now gathering around Margaret as she distributed cookies. "They've accepted you so completely. Matthew asked me yesterday if they would call you father." Samuel's breath caught. "What did you tell him?" "That it was entirely his choice, but that I thought you would be honored." She turned to face him. "Was I right?" His eyes glistened with unexpected emotion. "More than you know. After losing my children, I never imagined having the privilege of fatherhood again." Clara squeezed his hand, understanding the depth of his feeling without further words. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching as Joseph broke free from the group to race toward them, a cookie clutched triumphantly in each hand. "One for Mama, one for Papa," he announced, presenting his gifts with sticky-fingered pride. Samuel accepted the offering with grave solemnity, as though receiving a priceless treasure. "Thank you, Joseph. Most generous." As Joseph scrambled onto the bench between them, Clara reflected on the journey that had led to this moment. She had arrived in Silver Creek, desperate and alone, seeking only basic security for her children. Instead, she had found purpose, respect, love, and a future brighter than any she could have imagined when she first stepped off that stagecoach on a snowy January day. The mail-order bride had arrived with 6 children, only to be rejected by her intended groom. But in that moment of despair, the seeds of something far more precious had been planted, a genuine partnership founded on mutual respect, blossoming into a love that embraced not just 2 people, but an entire family. As Samuel had said that fateful day at the stagecoach stop, sometimes life's detours lead exactly where we need to go, though we couldn't have known it when we set out. Clara leaned her head against her husband's shoulder, content in the knowledge that their unexpected journey had only just begun. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.